Are you insane?
The only way to survive a mad world is to embrace the madness.
What keeps you going in this world? What gets you up in the morning?
What do you want to be, the thimble?
I'm the car.
The moment that tiny thing comes into the world, you're weaker because you would die for him.
You think you have a say on what they do or don't do?
You have to stop treating them like children.
But they are.
If anything were to happen to you, anything did happen.
Not anymore.
We're all in it. We've seen it and done.
No.
So stop putting us at the kids' table. Travis!
You understand this world. You understand me.
I'm here. Why isn't that enough? No, Nick!
If you don't go, we all die. So,
Go.
just go.
The early seasons of Fear the Walking Dead were a breath of fresh air and introduced us into some of the best written characters in the entire Walking Dead universe. It showed us the collapse of society and introduced us into the dysfunctional Clark family, and it took us to environments that we had never visited in the main show. The series had such a unique and charming vibe about it, however it totally loses this in its later seasons, and it turns into this show that just lacked any narrative direction, and the reviews for the final 2 seasons were god awful. In today's video, I'm going to be delving into the soaring highs and the extreme lows of this beloved series, so join me as we discuss the wasted potential of Fear the Walking Dead. Fear the Walking Dead got off to a brilliant start. Its first 3 seasons are written by the then showrunner Dave Erickson, and these first 3 seasons, in my opinion, are as good as, if not even better than some of the main show's seasons. However, this would all change after Scott Gimple took over, and he basically rebooted the show from season 4, moving the focus away from the Clark family, who we'd spent 3 seasons following, and shifting the focus onto Morgan Jones, which is something I will go into more detail in later, but due to this fact, it very much feels like 2 separate stories within one show. I mean, there are so many incomplete storylines from season 3 that we never get answers to, like what happened to Proctor John, where did Tucker and Crazy Dog go, and what happened to all the trading posts and the communities in Mexico. The season 4 reboot also ruined some already established character points, such as Madison's descent into villainy, Nick's role stepping up and helping his family. Also, all of a sudden, Luciana has now magically joined our group again. For me, it just ruins the already established foundations of the early seasons. When Fear the Walking Dead began, it had such a unique premise, exploring the early days of the zombie apocalypse, which is something the main show had glossed over. The idea of seeing society collapse in real time had enormous potential, and it was fascinating seeing our characters evolve and navigate this new alien world. However, the show quickly deviated from this core premise and rushed through the early stages of the outbreak, failing to explore the collapse of society in any depth. The series soon fell into the same familiar survival tropes as The Walking Dead, losing its unique identity, and it very quickly became a B-Tech version of the main show, with less interesting characters and a lot worse villains. But before I bash the show anymore, I would like to talk about how special the first 3 seasons of the show are to me. The scenery, the characters, and the vibes of the first 3 seasons are truly spectacular, and it's the whole reason I started making YouTube videos. This series holds an immensely special place in my heart, and I would do anything to watch them for the first time over again. I think the setting in Mexico is such an interesting concept, and the incredibly layered and flawed family dynamic of the Clarks felt so real and complex. Not to mention Nick and Travis, who quickly became some of my favourite characters in the whole Walking Dead universe. The Dave Erickson era of Fear was truly special, and there's a reason why on IMDb, seasons 1 to 3 averaged over 2.5 more stars than the later seasons of the exact same show. I would have loved to see Erickson's original 7 seasons, and I'm gutted we never got to see the final showdown between Nick and his mother, as the show portrayed how a normal person could descend into a monster given the right conditions. Now, it was already an uphill battle for Fear, as viewers were already accustomed to the characters from the main show. However, in the early seasons, on the most part, they outdo themselves. But most of these characters established in the early seasons end up dying prematurely or are just missing for the majority of the storyline. Now, I would like to say, I do think the show got incredibly unlucky with actors leaving, such as Cliff Curtis and Frank Delane, who were two of the strongest cast members, so it did put the writers in a very tricky situation. But let's take Travis for example. The viewers had watched Travis transform from an optimistic, naive character to a hardened survivor. However, as soon as we start to see Travis really grasp the idea of survival in the apocalypse, he gets killed off, possibly in one of the lamest deaths in the series as well. I get that they had to kill him off because the actor wanted to leave, but in my opinion his death was just handled so poorly, and me personally, I would have liked to see him die in the episode before, either whilst fighting all those walkers in the pit he got bit, or sacrificing himself when the base got overrun by the dead, instead of just getting shot and falling out of a helicopter randomly. And then there's Madison Clark. Although not a fan favourite, she was a character that sat right on the edge of the moral line, and often overstepped that line in order to keep her family safe. She was a fascinating character and had a lot of potential not just to turn into a villain, but also due to the dynamics and impacts she had on other characters, such as Strand, Alicia and Daniel. However, after season 3, her character is completely wasted, as she gets killed off, and then the writers change their minds and brought her back for the season 7 finale, and the Madison we get back is just a shell of the former character. I mean, this show is meant to depict the fall of society and show us a family who are trying desperately to survive, but it deviates so far from this premise that it becomes almost unrecognisable by the end. But the death that demonstrates this point best is of course Nick Clark. Nick is probably the most unique character from any Walking Dead media. Nick was introduced as a character struggling with a drug addiction, which immediately adds layers of vulnerability and complexity to his character. His addiction makes him flawed and imperfect, and his battle to stay clean in a world that's falling apart creates an internal struggle that fills the character with guilt. And we watch Nick grasp the new world and discover himself. He was already living on the fringes of society before the outbreak, so he adapts to the collapse of civilization completely differently to most. While others are panicked and shocked, Nick is almost at home in the chaos, having lived through his own personal hell before the outbreak even occurred. Nick not only offered the audience a unique viewing experience that was unlike any from the main show, but he was also the heart and soul of the series. And for many, with his death, the show died along with him. And it's not even just metaphorically, the ratings plummeted in the absence of Nick Clark. And although again the writers were left with little choice as Frank Delane asked to be written off the show, it was yet again a baffling death. It made such little sense from a narrative perspective, as it was an extremely out of character move from Charlie, and it also just felt like a blatant plot device to further Alicia's character arc. It was these deaths of arguably the 3 main characters from the early seasons of the show that annoyed long-term fans, as they basically saw the series they loved take a drastic tonal shift, and that leads nicely into my next point. The major tonal shift in season 4, which introduced characters from The Walking Dead such as Morgan, shifted the focus away from the core Clark family, and it felt like a reboot designed to boost ratings rather than serve the original storyline. This lack of narrative caused the series to feel disjointed and aimless, and Fear the Walking Dead began to rely heavily on its connection to The Walking Dead. It no longer stood on its own with its own distinct cast and narrative. Fear now seemed to be trying to emulate its parent show's success. This shift towards a more Walking Dead-like tone detracted from what initially made the show so different and interesting to watch. I mean, just look at the footage playing in the background now. Even the style of filming became less vibrant, and it became more grey. It all just felt a bit depressing. And this tonal shift meant we never truly got to delve into the different cultures and regions that the show showed us at the beginning. This would have offered us a fresh perspective compared to the East Coast centric world of The Walking Dead. Early seasons took place in Los Angeles and Mexico, and posed us with ideas such as language barriers and religious views on the dead, which we never explore in the main show. However, the show fails to truly capitalise and instead moves the setting over to Texas, giving us a massive time jump, meaning it not only lost the cultural diversity that made it such a fascinating watch in the first place, but it also skips the part of the apocalypse the show was advertised to be covering. It became the Morgan Jones show, and his introduction brought a softer, more idealistic tone to the series, and the all life is precious philosophy, whilst being interesting in the main show, felt so annoying and overused in this show, to the point where the characters would make the most stupid decisions imaginable. It no longer felt realistic, and it also clashed with the more brutal and morally ambiguous tones of the earlier seasons. Morgan's constant drive to avoid killing and to, quote, save people fell out of place in the world of Fear, and ruined the idea the earlier seasons built up, where survival would often require difficult and morally grey decisions. And not only that, fans started to grow frustrated with the unrealistic character decisions and plot lines. Characters such as Alicia and Strand often made choices that contradicted their earlier development, making them feel inconsistent and pointless as they were just going around in circles. Add to this plot lines that seem far-fetched even within the context of a zombie apocalypse, such as the nuclear missile launch in season 6, which further alienated fans who were looking for grounded storytelling. Instead of focusing on character-driven survival, the show started relying on extreme over-the-top scenarios to pull viewers in, rather than telling a compelling story. And it all just felt a world away from the simple but effective family drama storytelling in the early seasons of the show. Fear the Walking Dead villains often lacked the complexity and threat of those in the main show, such as Negan or the Governor. Characters like Virginia or the Proctors, although being good characters, they felt underdeveloped or failed to leave a lasting impact on the show. And you never really felt like the group were in danger. I mean, the Vultures might genuinely be the worst villain group in any Walking Dead media. They are genuinely so pointless and their philosophy made zero sense. Villains are a critical part of post-apocalyptic storytelling, and Fear didn't seem to have the same level of memorable antagonists, which meant it reduced the tension and stakes within the storyline. What makes this point even more painful is the early seasons of the show were gearing up to give us one of the most compelling and in-depth villains ever. As if we had have got the Madison turning into a villain arc that Dave Erickson planned, it would have given the show a truly iconic villain. And the tension built up over the 7 seasons, resulting in a final showdown between Madison and Nick, would have probably been one of the most beloved and tense scenes in the entire Walking Dead universe. It would have showed us how a normal person could descend into a monster, and if you go back and watch the early seasons of the show, you can really start to see the tension building up amongst Madison, Alicia and Nick. Watching their relationships getting slowly worse and worse would have been fascinating, and this would have given the show its big villain like Negan or the Governor from the main show. In conclusion, Fear the Walking Dead is a show that started off with some amazingly complex and unique characters in an awe-inspiring location that gave us a truly brilliant first 3 seasons. However, after Scott Gimple took over, the whole vibes of the show shifted, and it massively detracted from this once amazing show. Now, don't get me wrong, there are obviously some bright sparks after season 3, such as John Dory, season 6 episode 1, and also Dwight, but it largely became an almost unrecognisable show that deviates so far from its original premise. It lost its charm and failed to capitalise on the interesting setting it once proposed. I think having the group go to sea for a season was brilliant, and seeing them explore Mexico and coming across the cartel, they all felt like such fresh and original ideas, but the show slowly falls into a rehash of the main show. And the inconsistent writing and storylines really wore down the viewers over time. The longer it went on, it started to fall into the shadow of its parent series, and the season 4 reboot annoyed fans who had watched from the start, as it felt like they got robbed of seeing the Clark family storyline, and the promise of showing us the collapse of society. And the inconsistent writing and the storylines really started to wear down the viewers. The longer it went on, it started to fall into the shadow of its parent series, and the season 4 reboot annoyed fans who had watched from the start, as it felt like they got robbed of watching the Clark family storyline play out, and also the promises of showing us the collapses of society. It's a show that if Dave Erickson would have been able to see out his original plan, I truly believe it would have been up there in quality alongside the main show. For me, Fear the Walking Dead is a what could have been, and I'm gutted with how the series eventually panned out. The first 3 seasons were so special to me that it really hurts to make this video, but I guess I will forever be thinking about what this show could have been. But thank you all for watching today's video. I would really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed, as we are on our way to 5,000 subscribers. If you would like a say in my next video, make sure you turn on my notifications so you can get alerted to my polls that I hold every week over on my community page, as these decide what videos I'll be making next. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.